Are we losing something? From earliest eras onward, mankind has recorded its fascination for what it saw above, a heritage grafted in myth and stone. A college-time memory of 40 years ago, a school outing in the mountains somewhere in Germany, going down with friends to the village below, for the pub, the girls. It was over an hour's walk, but I had a quicker way. A piece of cardboard to slide down on. But one evening, that went all wrong. "40 years ago, I saw the glory of the night sky for the first time. The Milky Way, crystal clear in the freezing winter night. Becoming part of it all, an experience as old as mankind. The starry skies, a door to transcendence we opened from the earliest of times before history began."
Certainly, if you look at Lascaux, you have the shaman who go into a trance, feel that they are dying, and then feel that they're ascending to right up through the heavens. I think the sky gave human beings one of their first experiences of transcendence, and the sky itself, with its endless drama, was seen as divine.
In the skies was magic. Here the gods revealed themselves.
Because number one, the things that we see there appear to be self-luminous. Number two, they move. They have apparently a will of their own. And so they are up there, visible to all, but not at all something with which we can interfere. On top of that, the behavior of the sun, of course, and the moon seemed linked to things that are happening here on the earth. And those are the things that are really important to people. The changing of the seasons and the need for shelter, and of course the changes in weather and what that does to the clothing we wear and the availability of the game.
30,000 years ago, men recorded a fascination here for the world and cosmos around. The caves of Lascaux, France. Dots floating over a bull, the constellation of Taurus with the 7 stars of the Pleiades. More often, the mystery of the cosmos is encrypted in metaphors unfamiliar to us today. Under the Lascaux caves is a deep pit, only accessible with ropes. On its south wall, a bison, a man with a bird's head, a bird on a stick, a rhinoceros, and opposite, the image of a horse.
Der Schlüssel zur Enträtselung dieser Szene ist der Vogel auf dem Stab. In alten Kulturen, vor allen Dingen in schamanistischen Kulturen, symbolisiert er nämlich die Weltachse und deutet zum Polarstern hin. Und daher kommt der Gedanke, es könnte sich hier um Sternbilder handeln, die um den Polarstern herum sich bewegen. Und das sieht man dann so. Hier sieht man der Vogelmenschen als Sternbild, und das ist der Schamane, der der Milchstraße entlang reist. Denn noch heute findet man dort den Schwan als Sternbild. Und gegenüber sehen wir jetzt das Sternbild des Löwen, das heutige Sternbild, damals aber wohl als Wildpferd aufgefasst. Und man hat tatsächlich so, was man draußen gesehen hat, in der Höhle versucht wiederzugeben.
A bit of bone 18,000 years old, with marks that combine to 39 over and over again. 39 weeks, the time of pregnancy. The figure probably represents the constellation of Orion.
Wenn das zum ersten Mal wieder am Himmel sichtbar war, dann haben die Leute gesagt, jetzt wird es Zeit, dass wir einen netten Partner finden. Und dann wollten sie auch wissen, wann die Kinder kommen, denn für Jäger-Sammler war es wichtig, dass die nicht umhergezogen sind, wenn die Kinder kamen. Der Jäger Orion hat tatsächlich so einen Fortsatz. Im Orion gibt es eine Stelle, an dem der wunderbare Orionnebel zu sehen ist. Auch mit bloßem Auge kann man den ja sehen. Und das galt bei vielen alten Völkern als ein Hinweis, wie die Milchstraße, auf so ein milchiges Produkt, letztendlich auf Samenflüssigkeit. Der macht die Fruchtbarkeit. Und deswegen hat man den Orion, der ganz nah an der Milchstraße steht, auch aufgefasst als eine große göttliche Figur, die die Milchstraße mit erzeugt.
Ancient Egypt, for instance, saw Orion as Osiris, the god of fertility and new life, but also of life after death. For behind a notion such as fertility hide the fundamental questions of life and death. Who am I? What am I? Where am I going?
That sense of monumental extravagance and unquestionable scale invariably prompts the big questions. These are the most fundamental concepts that we can imagine, the cosmos in which we live and our own nature and origins.
Something of those origins reveals itself thanks to today's technical achievements. Over the last years, computers are enabling us to call back the positions of sun, moon, and stars in the distant past, which throws new light on what our ancestors sought in the skies above. We usually think it began here, Mesopotamia, today's Iraq.
Everybody thinks that astronomy begins with the Babylonians, but in fact, in Ireland, in the Neolithic, there was a very careful study of the heavens undertaken, in which they related the sky to the ground in a very monumental fashion.
Il motivo per cui si cita sempre e soltanto la civiltà babilonese è che ci sono i testi scritti. A Malta ci hanno lasciato delle informazioni scritte nella pietra.
In the distant Stone Age, 3,500 years before Christ and 1,000 years before history began, a little-known civilization stretching all over Europe, from Malta in the far south to the Orkney Islands north of Scotland, set its sights to the skies above. Best known by far is Stonehenge in England, built to track the cycles of the sun and moon, and possibly even capable of calculating and predicting their eclipses. Much less well known, but at least as fascinating, is what remains here in Ireland.
The Boyne is Ireland's foremost river in terms of its mythical and historic significance. Its name means the river of the white cow. It is significant that in ancient times the Milky Way was known as the Way of the White Cow. Perhaps they saw the river on the ground as being a reflection of the river of the sky. Scattered along its banks are a multitude of passage tombs, the most famous of which is Newgrange, Brúna Bóinne, the womb of the white cow.
5,500 years ago, passage tombs arose here with deep and narrow corridors. On the shortest day, December 21st, people waited here for the pale dawn of midwinter solstice, hoping the light would overcome the darkness, or with the ashes and bones of their dead, waiting for the last sun's light to enter the deep corridors.
The moment the sun touches the earth, opens a special portal to the stars, and after sunset then, the Neolithic soul was transported to the stellar realm in the afterlife.
The way up high. The shaman traveling the Milky Way is the Swan's constellation. An image from prehistory which may have an echo here in Newgrange. As long as people can remember, swans came here to stay the winter. In Irish myth, Newgrange was built by Angus, son of gods. In his dreams, he was visited by a beautiful woman, Care, but she vanished every time he closed his arms around her. Helped by the gods, he found her in the end, surrounded by swans.
And the two of them took the form of swans and flew back, and then they flew inside Newgrange. And of course, Newgrange has a passage which is cross-shaped and brings to mind the cross of the sky, as if they were trying to replicate the sky on the ground again.
And swan and winter solstice combine here in another way.
Now if we follow the line of winter solstice sunrise from Newgrange out into the distance, it intersects with another passage tomb in the distance, 15 kilometres away, called Fornox. Here we are, looking out through the narrow passageway towards the northeast. What we're trying to do here is to recreate the sky as it would have appeared to the astronomers sitting in this chamber 5,000 years ago. If we take the computer back to the time when Fornox was built, we see Deneb, the bright star of Cygnus, skimming the horizon, setting momentarily in the middle of the night. And then at the dawn of winter solstice, someone sitting here 5,000 years ago would have been able to see the bright swan star Deneb rising off the northeast horizon out through the passageway, and it would have become merged in the dawn of the winter solstice. Could it be that the ancient astronomers used Deneb to track the coming of the winter solstice?
At the same time, 5,500 years ago, and in the farthest south of Europe, Malta.
Proprio qui che troviamo, e nel luogo originale dove si trovava originariamente, la statua di quella che possiamo chiamare la divinità principale del Neolitico di Malta, e cioè la Dea Madre, una statua dalle forme molto arrotondate e gigantesca. Tutti i templi sono composti con l'aggiunta successiva di queste forme arrotondate, questi lobi. È molto ragionevole pensare che i lobi non siano altro che una rappresentazione del corpo della dea. Allora gli allineamenti al solstizio d'inverno dei templi acquistano il significato di un rito di fertilità, del rinnovo, se volete, dell'accoppiamento del sole con una divinità legata alla terra.
Malta boasts of amazingly beautiful, intricate temples underground and above.
A questo tempio si può infatti seguire il corso del sole durante tutto l'anno. Al solstizio d'estate il sole entra e incontra questa lastra. Poi durante l'anno si sposta fino a entrare in allineamento con l'asse del tempio nei giorni dell'equinozio. Infine al solstizio d'inverno entra e incontra quella lastra.
1,000 years later, ancient Egypt, ruled by the laws of the cosmos and the slow wheels of time. Sirius, brightest star in the night skies, was symbol for the god Horus, key to one of Egypt's greatest mysteries and to its greatest myth, that of the divine pair Isis and Osiris and their brother Seth, lord of chaos. Seth in his jealousy slew Osiris, who lived on amongst the stars as the constellation of Orion, lord of afterlife. And Isis bore their son Horus to bring back life to Egypt. Robert Bauval, born under the shadow of the Great Pyramid, unveiled the contours of the sky religion in which kings and priests obeyed the laws of myth and the universe as they built their monuments. Mysterious shafts inside the Great Pyramid of Giza aimed at the constellation of Orion and the star Sirius, Osiris and his son Horus. On the other side at the Pole Star and the Big Dipper, the god of chaos, Seth. Ancient Egypt felt ruled by the order of the cosmos, and it's not difficult to see why.
The whole of Egypt would be like this, were it not for one miracle of nature.
Each year as a scorching sun approached the summer solstice, Egypt lay parched and dying under the heat of midsummer. And each year, Egypt was saved from death by a miracle of resurrection. Monsoon rains from unknown Africa would pour out and arrive invariably at one moment, on June 21st, midsummer.
Each year, like clockwork, the waters of the Nile would rise and flood the land, turning the whole of Egypt into a miracle of abundance and prosperity. And it is no wonder that they focused entirely on this yearly miracle.
And every year, Egypt perceived that same miracle of rebirth in the heavens at exactly the same moment. Sirius, the brightest star in the skies, was blotted out by daylight and out of sight for 70 days. But at the dawn of summer solstice, just before sunrise and the coming of the floods, Sirius would suddenly reappear and twinkle over the horizon.
This was the magical moment they were waiting for every year. This was the great day of rebirth, with the constellation of Orion hovering in the east, looking down as if heralding the event. And this is what they saw, the bright star of Horus, the star Sirius, its light appearing for the first time at dawn, blending, merging with the rays of the new sun at the summer solstice.
Midsummer, when the floods came, when Egypt was reborn. That was Egypt's great New Year's Day. And they saw the same day 365 days afterwards. But through the years, they noticed that the New Year's Day on their calendar drifted away from midsummer and the coming of the floods.
Why? Because the true solar year, of course, has 365 days and a quarter.
And you don't see a quarter day. We add the extra day of February 29 to adjust for this leap year. But the ancient Egyptians did not. To them, these were the sacred cycles of time given by the gods.
And so, every 4 years, the New Year's Day moved by 1 day. And every 8 years by 2 days, and so on, and so on, and so on.
Which meant, in fact, that the calendar and real time grew apart.
It would take a full cycle 4 times 365 years. That is 1,460 years to return back to its original point.
1,460 years in which the Egyptians lost track of the time the floods would come. Only its kings and priests guarded the secret. The key lay in the vault of heavens and in Egypt's ancient monuments. There was a very important ritual before the building. The pharaoh and a priestess representing a goddess called Sachet would stretch a cord between them to define the direction of the temple, align it to the stars.
He was aiming at the group of stars going round and round the pole, the imperishable, the stars that never died. And most particularly, he was looking at this constellation, the constellation we call the Big Dipper, and that they call the Thigh.
The constellation of Seth, arch-enemy of Horus and Osiris, and therefore in opposition to them in the vault of heaven.
The circumpolar stars literally go round and round in 24 hours. You can use them as a clock. Now, they also noticed that the relative position between the star that they watched in the Big Dipper and the star Sirius was very close to 90 degrees, almost like a set square. So as you shifted, all you have to do is know when a certain star is at a certain place to predict the rising of the star Sirius.
So this was how the floods could be predicted. Bauval began finding the code encrypted in stone. First here at the Pyramid of Djoser, where a statue of the pharaoh sits in a curious stone cubicle looking out.
He was looking at 16 degrees above the horizon and 4 degrees to the right of the north-south axis of the sky. He is looking at the passage of this star, the hoof star, of the Thigh. Why? The explanation is as simple as it is dramatic. For if at this precise moment you turn east, you will see that magical moment of the rising of the star Sirius. The architect has locked the whole complex into the machinery of the sky and of rebirth.
I like very much this idea of sacred machines. You have the cosmic order in the sky and you have the order on the earth. And you can open connections between them. All such attention to the sky, this idea of sacred machines, was aimed as the foundation of power. The pharaoh was founding his power on the stars. And this is, in fact, a quite common mechanism. The China emperor was the son of the sky, and so on.
China, Japan, cultures in which the harmony of heavens stood model for the order on earth. A rare event in Japan. For just one day, an ancient tomb is open to the public. There are over 100,000 such burial mounds, all undisturbed owing to the veneration of the ancestors. Only 2 were dug up, and not only do they show symbolic figures, but above all the 4 cardinal directions, the sun, the moon, and a chart of the night sky, the way ancient China saw it, with the main constellations arranged in 28 groups called shukus, to help predict the future in heaven as on earth.
その後それ以外の星座もたくさん生まれてきたと。そういうそれ以外の星座は宿とは言わないんでして、地上の社会制度を天に反映させたような、天の星にも地上の社会と同じようなものがあるということですので、これは星の官僚制度、官僚組織ということで。
Like directions on the compass or the constellations with their fixed places in the heavenly order, the empire's mandarins and bureaucrats had their fixed places in the order on earth. And like the North Pole was the axis around which everything turned in heaven, so everything turned around the emperor on earth, where he reigned with a mandate from heaven. Concepts emerging from the mist of time, confirmed by the great Confucius, which served to bolster the supreme power of the emperor. From the very first one, Qin Huangdi, who united China 2 centuries before Christ, completed China's Great Wall, and left another miracle, this terracotta army, thousands of clay soldiers guarding the east side of his tomb. This mound with tomb itself remained untouched and a mystery until today.
The historian Sima Qian described what was inside of the first emperor's tomb, and he indicated that the sarcophagus of the emperor was floating in a pool of mercury. Quite a trick if you imagine just that. But then on the ceiling of this tomb, he also describes that all of the constellations were depicted.
And there is another baffling possibility. China's obsession with harmony and balance implies that if there was an army to protect the emperor buried in the east, the tomb would also have to have that same protection in the west, north, and south. And the first excavation brought this to light: 2 chariots and horses made of copper.
And so this might suggest as well that there would be things to be found in the north and on the south too. But we have to be cautious because, in fact, the mountain range to the north was also regarded as having the protective influence, and maybe that was sufficient. There'll only be one way to know, of course, and that, like exploring the tomb itself, is to dig.
But the terracotta army might only be the beginning of it.
I suspect the terracotta army is only the beginning of it.
Mythical power founded on the heavens is also found in the heart of European history.
Questo è il Pantheon, uno dei monumenti più famosi del mondo romano. La sua fronte è sempre in ombra, perché lo scopo del monumento era fondare il potere dell'imperatore sulle stelle e sul cielo. Al suo interno si trovano 8 nicchie, 5 erano dedicate ai pianeti, 2 al Sole e alla Luna. L'8ª contiene l'ingresso. Il Sole batte soltanto il giorno della fondazione di Roma, il 21 di aprile, ed entra da sud. Questo è il motivo per cui il tempio è orientato a nord.
A mezzogiorno il Sole si trova a una certa altezza. In generale è più in alto della porta o più in basso sul pavimento. Soltanto il 21 di aprile illumina esattamente con un fascio di luce simile a un proiettore l'ingresso. Per cui la persona che entra nel Pantheon, naturalmente dobbiamo pensare all'imperatore, in quel giorno entra insieme al Sole all'interno del movimento.
Dunque l'imperatore fondava il suo potere sul Sole e sulle stelle. Lo stesso era avvenuto circa un secolo prima per Giulio Cesare, alla cui morte apparve una cometa. Questa cometa fu usata da Augusto per fondare il potere dell'impero romano.
Christmas and the Nativity Star. An even stronger example of how an event gains mythical proportions when accompanied by an event in heaven. And even closer to home. The Cologne Cathedral houses, as legend has it, the remains here of the three magi who followed the star of the Nativity, which pointed them to Bethlehem 2,000 years ago.
Some just say it was a miracle. Others prefer to think that it was made up because heaven must in fact endorse great events. But it's also possible that there really was some kind of astronomical event, and every imaginable astronomical explanation has been offered.
A comet suddenly lighting up as it enters our solar system. But there are no records of that, and the famous Halley comet didn't turn up in that period. A nova, some suggest, an exploding star many light years away.
The Chinese do report a few novae during a broad period of time that corresponds to the birth of Christ, but we run into a much more serious problem right away, and that's the date for the birth of Christ. First, you have to settle on that date, and then you can examine whether anything happened. And the date of the birth of Christ is even more controversial than the Christmas star.
A conjunction of planets, then, perhaps?
There was, in fact, a triple conjunction in 7 BC. And this triple conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn, where the two planets appear to come close to each other, they appear to separate, pass once more, and then separate and pass again. This triple conjunction is a relatively rare event.
Well, possibly then. Astronomer Michael Molnar looks at 6 BC because he hit upon an event that year which may have led to the legend of the Star of Bethlehem.
During the reign of King Herod, astrologers believed that Aries the ram symbolized his kingdom, that is Judea, Samaria, the lands that he controlled.
On April 17th of that year, not only the royal planet Jupiter emerges in Aries, but it's followed by Saturn, then the Sun and the Moon upon that, with the moon eclipse as a climax during which Jupiter suddenly shines out like the morning star.
But there are some historians who favor a later date, around year 1 BC. And in fact, there was another remarkable conjunction during that period. One, in fact, in which the planets Jupiter and Venus appeared on one day actually to merge.
Can't you be specific? Can't you give me one Star of Bethlehem at Christmas, the birth of Christ?
Certainly, we can't give you anything at Christmas, December 25th. If there's one thing we know, it's most likely that whenever Christ was born, it wasn't on the 25th of December. That was adopted by Christianity centuries later. There are many astronomical events through the decade or so in which Christ might have been born. And if you give me a date for the birth of Christ, I will give you a Christmas star.
In the light of thousands of flickering oil lamps, these jade statues with their tiny quartz crystals would glisten and twinkle like stars in the Milky Way.
But compares to how the Indian subcontinent was aware of the cosmos around.
And that encapsulates the essence of Buddhist meditation, which is to reach beyond oneself, reach outwards to the cosmos.
Chandra Wickramasinghe, astrophysicist of world renown and Sri Lanka's most famous scholar.
Right in the middle of this enormous city complex, built in the 5th century AD, stands this gigantic rock. It was King Kassyapa's attempt to connect man with the bigger cosmos. It is like the Tower of Babylon, reaching for the stars.
In the heart of Sri Lanka 15 centuries ago, a king laid out his capital around a gigantic rock, crowning it with his palace.
This mirroring wall, coiled like a snake, leading to the entrance. To anyone walking along this corridor, the reflections of the frescoes on this shiny wall would have looked like celestial maidens merging with the stars of the Milky Way in the night sky.
The entrance was through the mouth of a gigantic lion, of which now only the paws remain.
It is, of course, the royal emblem of the kings of Sri Lanka, but I cannot believe that that huge, imposing structure of a lion was not in some way connected with the constellation of Leo. That was, after all, the aspiration of the people who occupied this site, the astronomical connection between human beings and the constellations.
No one really knows. Little or no study has been made of how monuments here relate to the heavens above, because it's taken for granted, so commonplace that it seems hardly worth note from scholars. Every ancient monument is aligned to the cardinal directions, and more. No medical treatment is undertaken. No marriage is concluded here. No houses built without consulting an astrologer.
In fact, in Sri Lankan politics, nothing is done before consulting an astrologer. I think every Hindu festival is defined by astrological considerations.
Words can't describe what you see. You estimate it's going to be 30 million people. That's 10 million people more than my country.
The stars define the start of the greatest religious festival of the world, Kumbh Mela, to which in all over 100 million people flock to bathe in the waters of the Ganges River.
Buddhism and Hindu religion are very much a cosmological religion. We are creatures of the cosmos. I think a large, imposing river that runs across the earth is rather like the Milky Way, a river of stars dominating the starry skies. It is an attempt to link up with the flowing water of rivers, merging with the physical environment that exists around us.
So full there, so empty here. A land of extremes. Extreme heat quieting all life in summer, frigid winds in winter. And yet in this forbidding land, an ancient people some 1,000 years ago chose to construct the center of their world. The place is a remote canyon in America's southwest called Chaco. 1,000 years ago, the heart of an ancient Pueblo Indian civilization who built elaborate structures of over 700 rooms with exquisite walls, originally reaching 4 stories high. Taking 2 centuries to complete, and then the builders mysteriously sealed it up, left, and vanished from history.
Well, we don't have tablets and books. There is a language in the architecture, and it's an opening for us to understand the minds of the people here.
2 decades ago, Anne so far took a vacation climb to the top of this rock, Fajada Butte, towering over the main complex, Pueblo Bonito. Behind 3 great slabs of stone, she found a large spiral carving, just as a dagger of sunlight pierced its center.
If I had come 3 minutes later, it wouldn't have had that strength of image. And it was so vivid. And it was just a week from solstice and very close to noon.
There is a smaller spiral, where on the equinox days, when day and night are of equal length, March and September 21st, a second dagger appears. And on December 21st, on the shortest day of the year, 2 daggers descend to perfectly bracket the spiral. But another petroglyph would really trigger Anne Sofa into years of amazing discovery.
It was so small it nearly escaped my notice. But this petroglyph showed the half circle of Pueblo Bonito. And with an arrow along the mid-wall of the building. pointing to the south and to the above, to the sun just at noon. A Hopi man told me that that small petroglyph was more important than the building itself.
Pueblo Bonito has two long straight walls, one exactly north-south. As the morning sun arcs over the building, the shadow of the mid-wall recedes to disappear exactly at noon.
It's no accident because this wall is exactly north-south, dividing Pueblo Bonito. And when we see the petroglyph on Fajada Butte, we see that that arrow is pointing to the sun just in the middle of its journey each day.
The long east-west wall is also related to the sun. On the two equinox days, it rises and sets exactly in line with it. In fact, Pueblo Bonito's east-west wall exactly divides the seasons of the year and the day from the night, just the way its mid-wall divides morning from afternoon. Other buildings up to 20 miles away were similarly positioned on lines to the sun.
Standing here on the first day of fall or the first day of spring, we find that if you follow the line of one building to the sun, you come to another building.
The Chaco people wove a wide pattern of invisible lines connecting their buildings. The noon-sun alignment that connects these buildings north to south precisely bisects the space between two other main buildings running east to west. Why go to such lengths?
As these people would view the heavens, there was an order up there. What you had here contrasted to that. Some years it was too dry, too windy, too cold. If there was a way to transfer the orderly nature of the cosmos down onto the chaos that exists here, then you begin to then integrate both heaven and earth.
Huge numbers of people came here for complex rituals, ordered and timed to the cosmic cycles. The halls were roofed, filled with darkness, connecting it with the earth. And yet the people participating in the ceremonies inside must have held the motions of the sky in their mind, both those of the day and of the night.
If you align a building to some aspect of the sun, why wouldn't you orient that to some aspect of the moon?
But the moon is more elusive. The Hopi call it the foolish man who runs around with no home. Only tracking it over generations can observers follow its complex cycles. The full moon, occurring at midwinter, rises and sets farthest north in the year. That same moon rises and sets farther and farther north over 9 1/4 years, and takes another 9 1/4 years to return to complete an 18 1/2-year cycle. The far points of those cycles are called the minimum and maximum extremes.
I thought it would be highly unlikely that we would find that the Chacoans aligned their buildings to this long cycle of the moon. But we did find evidence that they had that knowledge on Fajada Butte.
The moon shadow marks the center of the spiral, just where the sun's light dagger pierces at summer solstice. Year by year, the shadow cast on the spiral by full winter moons follows the 9 1/4 turns of the spiral and back. The maximum moon marks the outer edge, the minimum moon the inner edge. Over half of Chaco's buildings turned out to be aligned to these positions, through the center line or along the long back wall. And the team found an even more amazing phenomenon. The Chacoans connected their buildings tracing the traveling moon.
Here at Concletso, in the Central Canyon, there's a relationship to a building 15 miles away.
The moon not only rises in alignment with this building, at its high point, it crosses the center line of a second building. And completing its cycle, it sets in line with a third. And amazingly, lines of minimum and maximum moons connecting different buildings travel distances of over 25 miles, passing through mesa walls that block the view, bisecting the solar axis of the central complex. At no time would a person see this pattern. It is as though this intricate symmetry of relationships to the sky and the earth, as above, so below, was only to be held in the minds of the people.
I think a lot of Chacoan ceremonial architecture was built to get in touch with ancient mythic events. Pilgrims all over the world, that's why they go to these sacred spots. They go there to get in contact with the power of the events and the miraculous associations of those places.
One such place is Europe's oldest and most famous pilgrimage.
Peregrinos, ¿dónde van? ¡A Finisterre! ¿Por qué? ¡Es el fin del mundo!
The growing crowds that take the Camino to medieval Santiago de Compostela will be surprised to find that the original pilgrimage did not go to that city at all, but 100 kilometers beyond, to a place defined by nature and the heavens, Finisterre, the end of the world.
Esta peregrinación empieza con la noche de los tiempos. Allí empezaba el océano de tinieblas, allí empezaba el Hades, allí empezaba la tierra de los muertos.
For thousands of years, people simply walked west to where the stars died until their road met the endless ocean where the world ended and dead souls went, where every evening the sun sank into the mare tenebris, the sea of shadows. A pilgrimage taken over by the church over the last 1,000 years. But slowly, almost unconsciously, people now trickle back to this ancient pilgrimage to contemplate life, death, and life after death, and the bond between heaven and earth.
Man läuft den ganzen Camino, den Muscheln immer den Strahlen nach, und die letzte Muschel in Finisterre geht nach unten. Und man ist
ins Meer.
Ins Meer, also in die Erde, das ist der Weg zu Ende. Und man ist 700 Kilometer Richtung Westen gelaufen und hatte 700 Kilometer lang die Sonne im Rücken. Und das ist der letzte Moment, wo man die Sonne im Rücken hat. Wenn man dann zurückgeht, hat man die Sonne wieder im Gesicht und man geht wieder zurück ins Leben, ins Licht, ins Helle.
Nowhere was the bond between heaven and earth felt stronger. Nowhere are the skies clearer than in the Andes. This is the holy valley of the Incas, once heart of the great empire of the sun, mirror of heaven.
Los incas concibieron de que este valle es sagrado por ser un reflejo en espejo de la Vía Láctea. Por ejemplo, utilizaron las formas de la naturaleza para representar las imágenes de las constelaciones andinas, como el caso de la imagen de la llama junto al pueblo de Ollantaytambo.
The llama and its child are one of the constellations the Incas saw in the Milky Way, not of stars, but of dark nebula, of interstellar dust. The Milky Way, in other places hardly visible, is so clear here that the dark clouds appear in stunning definition, which they name llama, serpent, fox, or eagle, here setting off towards the sun, or hampatu, the toad.
Aquí en Pisac, la constelación del cóndor, con las alas abiertas en actitud de llevar a los espíritus a la Vía Láctea.
There is a tradition that the Incas foresaw their doom in those very heavens and dark nebulae of the Milky Way and tried to ward off disaster by trying to stop time, and a religious revolution with this as its most haunting element. The yearly sacrifice of 2 unblemished children in the most solemn of all Inca rituals, the plea of the king. Thanks to Spanish chroniclers, we even know the words. May the sun and moon remain forever young. May the earth not turn over. And may peace endure. This was the plea at heaven's bar which the children were to carry to the stars, sacrificed on the mountaintops, we still find them there, accompanied by their dolls. Through millennia, mankind expressed its fascination for the sky's in endless variety, until 5 centuries ago, when Copernicus made the sun at the center of our universe and reduced the Earth to a planet amongst many, since Galileo invented the telescope, and astronomers no longer watch the heavens with the naked eye, and the skies become the realm of science. But increasingly, today even science gets carried away by the mystery of heavens. In the early 1960s, Chandra Bikamasinghe, then a brilliant young Sri Lankan astrophysicist, teamed up with one of the greatest astronomers of his age, Sir Fred Hoyle. They investigated the same huge clouds of interstellar dust roaming the galaxies so crucial to the Incas. Thought to consist of ice particles, they came to a stunning conclusion: not ice, but carbon.
Now, carbon is an important component of life, and moreover, the carbonaceous particles had to be organic in character, organic to the extent of mimicking living particles like bacteria and viruses. So life had to operate on a huge cosmic scale.
Could the gigantic nebulae of interstellar dust roaming the universe be the cradle of life? The conclusion probably cost them the Nobel Prize at the time.
It was absolute heresy. In fact, even the idea that there was organic material in space was widely disputed. Many astronomers said that we were mad to consider organics existing in space because they wouldn't survive in space. Now, of course, with new techniques, with space probes and so on, we know that the galaxy is chock-a-block with organic materials. Over the last decade or two, microbiologists have been finding that bacteria on the Earth have incredible survival properties.
Bacteria thrive in the heart of nuclear reactors, in volcanic heat or deep frozen for 500,000 years. Bacteria from Earth were found on equipment astronauts left for years in space or on the moon, surviving by learning to feed on aluminum.
There are bacteria that can survive intense ultraviolet radiation and so on. So I think, on the whole, it's transpiring that bacteria are born space travelers.
Science has now widely begun to accept Chandra's ideas. Meteorites are being scanned for fossil signs of bacteria. Space probes are planned in search of bacterial life in space, and proof for the idea that we may be stardust. Life on Earth has always been thought to have begun with modest cells, accidentally forming in puddles bordering the first oceans 2 million years ago. But fossils of bacteria are now found in stones dating far, far before that.
We know that the very earliest life on Earth appears at a time when the Earth was pounded by comets some 4 billion years ago. And it's impossible to understand that appearance of life in a very harsh environment unless the comets themselves brought the first life onto our planet.
As we know more about space, we are more humiliated by our own insignificance. Space Telescope Hubble, zooming in on a small segment of the Big Dipper, photographed 6,000 galaxies like ours. There may be millions or billions of planets carrying life. Life's building blocks may form inside interstellar clouds, be catapulted out of exploding stars or cosmic collisions, and carried in comets through the universe.
I think it's turning out beyond a shadow of doubt that we are truly creatures of the cosmos, in the way that ancients had always believed to be true. The cosmology that is described in the ancient Buddhist texts is virtually mind-boggling. The sun is the center of a planetary system, part of a galaxy of stars, part of a cluster of galaxies, and a hierarchy of astronomical systems are described exceedingly accurately. Now, how was that information obtained without the use of a telescope, except if we were derived from the cosmos? Is it surprising that each of us, deep within our psyches, still have an innate knowledge of the world around us, an inkling of our origins?
But modern times bring both new awareness and new tragedy. We no longer see the night skies. In most places, stars and Milky Way, once brilliant everywhere, are reduced to this. To blame is the light with which we envelop ourselves.
Es gibt im Englischen den Begriff Inspiration Lost. Und vor lauter Licht sehen wir den Sternenhimmel nicht mehr. Ich denke, wir verlieren eine ganz, ganz wichtige Hälfte von unserem eigenen Wesen.
The brilliance of the night skies is no longer visible where the world is turning its lights on high.
We have deliberately shut the skies away from us, and in doing so, we have accomplished some kind of megalomania, a false sense of importance.
Are we losing something? As we turn the lights on, are we blinding ourselves?
The first thing we're losing when we shut ourselves in this cocoon of light is a sense that life is filled with darkness. It's thinking that you can tame mystery. We said we'd explain mystery, that science would answer all our questions, and in fact that hasn't happened. The more we discover about the cosmos, the more our minds cannot encapsulate it, and the world is even more mysterious than we thought. And the more we try to control, the more frustrated we become in our lack of ability to create a universe entirely tailor-made for ourselves. And in doing that, you knock out the mystery. You knock out transcendence, and you actually deny essential aspects of our humanity, which is that we are beings, ultimately, that do not have total control.